wind that night had teeth. It didn't just howl through the valley, it bit down and stayed there, rattling every joint in my bones. I'd been riding too long without rest, bleeding slow from a knife wound that was getting meaner by the hour. The sky was black enough to make you feel blind, the kind of black that swallows the moon and spits rain in your face. My horse was done in, stumbling with every other step, so when I saw the dark outline of a barn leaning against the storm, I knew it was the only choice I had left. I made it through the gate with more luck than strength. The barn door was swollen with rain and didn't want to open, so I forced my shoulder into it and near lost my balance getting inside. The smell hit me first: damp straw, animal sweat, a hint of wood rot. Warm compared to the outside, but only just. I didn't care. I found the first dry patch of straw I could, sank down slow, and let the dark take me. My side was on fire, my breath short. I told myself I'd just rest a moment. Maybe I even believed it. I woke to light, a flicker of it, moving like it wasn't sure if it should be there. I didn't move, but my hand went to my ribs out of habit. The blood was sticky under my shirt. My eyes followed the light, and then I saw her. She wasn't a shadow, she was solid, boots sinking into the wet floor, coat wrapped tight around her. A lantern swung from her hand, bending the light across her face. She was no stranger to hard weather or harder days. I could see that in the way she moved, quick but not careless. Her eyes landed on me and stayed there. "Jesus," she breathed, like maybe she thought I was a bad dream she couldn't shake. I wanted to speak, to tell her I'd be gone by morning, that I didn't mean harm. But my throat felt like it had been scraped dry. All that came out was a groan I couldn't hold back. She came closer, kneeling in the straw, and I could see her jaw set, like she'd already made up her mind about something. "Sir," she said, her voice tight, testing me like you'd test the ground before stepping on thin ice. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My vision was starting to gray at the edges again, but I caught the shape of her face, steady, unsmiling, all business. She wasn't the kind to run from trouble, but I wasn't sure yet if she was the kind to help it either. The rest came in flashes. Hands under my arm, pulling me to my feet, her frame smaller than mine, but stubborn as a mule. The barn door again, the slap of rain against my face, mud sucking at my boots. Then warmth. Different this time. Fire warmth, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of a door slamming hard behind us. I landed hard on a wooden floor. Her voice called out, sharp now, full of command. "Tommy, boil water now. Ellie, get the clean rags from the chest." Small footsteps thudded away. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt heavy, like they belonged to someone else. Her hands were on my coat, pulling it open, finding the wound. The air hit it, and I flinched. Knife wound. Deep. I'd known it would be bad, but seeing the look on her face told me it was worse. She poured something over it, whiskey by the smell, and the burn lit me up from my side to my teeth. My body arched before I could stop it, and for a second, my eyes locked on hers. Brown eyes, sharp and sure, the kind that see more than you want to give away. I held her gaze until the strength went out of me again. Her hands worked fast after that. Needle, thread, a steady rhythm of stitching. I'd been sewn up before, but not like this. Not by someone who looked at me like a man. Not a mark or a mess to clean up. I thought about telling her she was wasting her time. I thought about asking for my gun. Instead, I stayed still. When she finished, she wrapped my side with linen, tucked a quilt around me, an old one worn at the corners, and gave me water. I drank slow, every swallow a reminder that I was still here. She didn't say much after that, just sat back and watched me. I could feel her measuring me, deciding what kind of trouble I was and whether it was worth keeping under her roof. The rain kept on, tapping the roof like it was trying to get in. I closed my eyes, not from trust, but because I didn't have the strength to keep them open. Somewhere in the quiet, I heard her tell someone, maybe herself, "Keep watch. Wake me if he stirs." I didn't stir again until morning. When I opened my eyes, the fire had burned down to embers, daylight sneaking through the window. The storm was quieter now, just a steady rain. I was in a small room, 2 children's voices somewhere outside, feeding animals from the sound of it. The woman was still there, same chair, same watchful eyes. She rose when she saw me looking. "You're in my home," she said, calm but clear. "You were bleeding bad when I found you by my barn. I stitched you up." I managed a rough, "How long?" "Since last night," she said. "Almost a full day." She didn't ask for my name, so I gave it anyway. "Jonas Kane." She nodded. "Clara Whitlow, this is my home. I live here with my children. You picked a bad time to come through." "I didn't mean to." I figure as much, she said, but you're here and you're hurt. You're not going anywhere for a while. And just like that, I knew my road had stopped here, for the night, maybe for longer. But something in the way she said it, steady and certain, told me she meant to keep me alive whether I wanted it or not. If you've been listening this far, I'd ask you to do one thing for me. Like this video, leave a comment, and follow the channel. Stories like this one, they're worth telling, but they're worth more when someone hears them. You might just find a piece of your own road in mine. Morning light has a way of making a place honest. The storm had stripped the night clean, but it didn't make anything softer. My side throbbed like a dull drum, each beat reminding me I was still here and still not in control of the where or the why. The woman, Clara, she'd said, sat in the same chair she must have been in all night. Her hair was pulled back, a few stray strands catching the weak light coming through the single window. She wasn't leaning, wasn't resting, just watching. When she saw my eyes open, she stood slow, like she didn't want to spook me. That told me something about her. She'd met men who woke with fight in them before. "You're in my home," she said again, same steady tone as the night before. "You were bleeding bad when I found you by my barn. I stitched you up." I worked some gravel out of my voice. "How long?" "Since last night, almost a full day." She didn't flinch under my stare, didn't rush to fill the silence. I gave her my name. "Jonas. Jonas Kane." She nodded, filing it away like she'd just put me in some mental ledger. "Clara Whitlow, this is my home. I live here with my children. You picked a bad time to come through." "I didn't mean to. I figure as much. But you're here and you're hurt. You're not going anywhere for a while." That last part had weight to it. Not a threat, but not a request either. I'd been told to stay put before, by lawmen, by outlaws, by people who wanted me gone as soon as I could stand. This didn't sound like any of those. I tried to sit up, and the pain came fast, sharp enough to make my vision pulse. She moved before I could tell her not to, slipping a folded blanket behind my back, steadying me with more strength than her frame should have allowed. "Drink slow," she said, handing me a cup. "You'll feel like you're drowning if you rush it." I took a careful sip, the water cold and clean. "You alone here?" Her eyes flicked toward the window where I could hear children's voices. Number my son's 10, my daughter's 6. Their father's gone. Been that way 2 winters now. I let that sit between us. Loss is something you don't pick at in other folks unless they open the door themselves. "Sorry," I said out of habit. "I don't need sorry. I need you not dying on my floor." That made me smile a little, though I didn't let it show much. It was the first time in a long while someone had spoken to me like I was just a man who could be useful, not a problem to solve or a bounty to claim. Her boy came in then, carrying a half-filled pail, and his eyes went straight to me. "He awake?" "He is," Clara said. "You got shot or stabbed?" "Stab," I said, watching the kid's eyes narrow like he was picturing it. "You gonna shoot the man who did it?" I took a moment before answering. "Not if I don't have to." That seemed to settle something in him. He gave me a small nod before heading toward the back, like we'd just shaken hands without touching. The girl, Ellie, Clara had called her, appeared next. Tiny thing, fingers gripping the doorframe. She didn't speak, just stared. "It's all." "Right," Clara told her gently. "He's not going to hurt us." Ellie looked at me, and I gave her a slow nod. It was all I had to offer. To my surprise, she stepped into the room. They ate at the table while I stayed on the floor, leaning against the wall. Clara offered me a spoonful of whatever she'd made, oats still warm, and I took it without argument. It tasted better than anything I'd had in weeks, maybe because it wasn't eaten in the saddle or with one eye on the horizon. Outside, the rain had eased to a mist. Through the window, I could see the land stretched out in tired browns and grays, the kind of place that didn't forgive weakness. By late afternoon, I was asleep again, deeper this time. When I woke, the fire was low, and Clara was sitting by the door with a shotgun across her lap. I didn't need to ask why. A wound like mine wasn't an accident. Someone had meant it, and men who carry knives long enough to get cut by them don't usually just pass through politely. I'd been in a lot of rooms like that one, small, simple, built to last if you treated it right, but none of them had ever felt like they could be mine, not until that moment, watching her keep watch over a man she didn't know. I didn't trust it yet, but I wanted to. By the second day, I could sit without feeling like the room was swaying. The pain was still there, sharp when I twisted wrong, but my head was clear enough to take in more than the inside of that cabin. Clara moved through the place like every step counted. She didn't waste a motion. Water got poured just so. Tools hung in the same spot every time. Even the broom leaned against the wall with its bristles combed straight. That kind of order doesn't come from habit alone. It comes from knowing if you don't keep the small things steady, the big things will bury you. She'd check on me every so often, not fussing. Just a quick look at my color, my breathing, the way my hands moved. She knew the signs of infection, I could tell. Probably learned them the hard way. The boy, Tommy, came in from the yard, smelling of hay and wet dirt. He peeked at me through the window before stepping inside. "You ever fix a fence?" he asked. "Plenty," I said. He just nodded like he'd been expecting that answer and went on about his business. The girl stayed quieter, always near the wall, her little hands busy with bits of cloth. By evening, we were all in the main room, fire going steady, shadows moving across the walls. Ellie was on the floor, making up stories with her cloth dolls. Tommy was poking the fire like it was a job that needed doing. Clara was mending something in her lap, a shirt maybe, though the thread was almost the same color as her dress. She looked up at me suddenly. "You fix fences too?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah," I said. "Looks like you've done everything else." Her mouth twitched. Could have been a smile. Could have been just the firelight catching her. "You a rancher?" she asked. "No," I said, slow. "Not anymore." That was the kind of answer that hangs in the air, waiting for more. She didn't push. I liked that about her, but I could feel her wondering, so I went ahead and gave her something. Was a bounty hunter. Long time. Before that, I rode with men who didn't ask many questions and didn't give many answers. Tommy's head came up. "You hunted outlaws?" "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes I just did what I was paid to." Clara didn't flinch at that. She just kept looking at me like she was piecing together a puzzle. "Why'd you stop?" she asked finally. I met her eyes. "Because they killed my brother." It came out flat. No tremble, no fire. I'd told that truth enough times in my head to know there was no dressing it up. He wasn't supposed to be with me, just a favor. One ride. Got caught between two men who wanted me dead, and each other dead worse. I shook my head. "That's how it happens. You think you can play the line between law and outlaw, then someone else pays the price." She sat back, her needle still for a moment. I could see she understood. Not the details maybe, but the weight of it. Tommy's voice was quieter now. "So someone's after you?" "Probably," I said. Clara didn't ask names. She didn't need to. Some things just hang over a man like smoke. You don't need to see the fire to know it's there. After the kids went to bed, she stayed up. I did too, sitting instead of lying down. My side was sore, but I wanted my feet under me if trouble came. "You ever kill a man?" she asked, eyes on the fire. "Too many," I said. "You regret it?" I looked down at my hands, at the calluses, the faded ink on my forearm from another lifetime. "I regret not stopping sooner." That was enough for her. She poured coffee for both of us, black, bitter, no talk of sugar, and we drank it in peace. Later, when the cabin was quiet and the fire was more ember than flame, I stood at the window, leaning on the frame. The air outside was still damp, the hills dark and silent. "You expecting trouble?" Clara's voice came from just behind me. "Eventually," I said, "but not tonight." She stepped up beside me, arms folded. "If it comes, you're not fighting it alone." I looked at her then, really looked. She meant it. And I realized something that unsettled me more than the thought of a fight. I believed her. It was early, just past dawn, the kind of hour when the world is still shaking the sleep off its back. I'd gotten into the habit of rising before the sun, stretching the stiffness from my side, walking the yard while the air was still cold enough to bite. Clara usually lit the stove about then, and the kids stayed tucked in for another hour. That morning, the light was soft, the mist low over the pasture, and for a while I thought maybe we'd get a quiet day. Then I heard it, the sound of hooves, faint but steady, riding the edge between near and far. It wasn't. Coming from the main road, whoever it was had circled wide through the low hills behind the property. That was enough to put the hair up on my neck. I stopped near the water trough, straining to catch the rhythm. 2 horses maybe, but the second was lagging. Could have been nothing. Could have been everything. My gut told me it was the second one. I crouched low, scanning the hills, but they were still too far to make out. I felt the ache in my side sharpen with each breath. No sense standing out there like a target. I headed back to the house, quick but careful. The second I stepped inside, Clara turned from the stove. She took one look at me and said, "Something's wrong." "Horses," I told her. 2 riders, circling wide. She didn't waste time asking why I thought that mattered. By now she knew I didn't say things like that unless it did. She set the spoon down, untied her apron, and crossed the room in 3 strides. Her hand went to the rifle leaning in the corner. "Tommy," she called, firm but not panicked. The boy appeared in the hallway, hair sticking up from sleep. "Get Ellie. Go to the cellar. Quiet now." He didn't argue, just disappeared and came back with her small hand in his. Ellie's eyes were wide, but she didn't make a sound. In another breath, the door to the cellar shut behind them, and it was just me and Clara in the main room. "I don't know if it's them," I said, checking the revolver I'd found tucked in a drawer my first night here, "but I'm not betting otherwise." She nodded once. "Where do you want me?" "Front window," I said. "I'll take the side." The cabin wasn't built for defense. No fortifications, no barricades, just walls and hope. We took our positions, rifles ready, eyes scanning the horizon. Minutes stretched long. 10, then 20. The sound of hooves had gone quiet, replaced by that heavy kind of silence that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. Then came a knock. Not on the door. On the barn. 3 sharp taps, deliberate. I moved first. Slipped out the side door, keeping low along the brush. My boots sank into the wet earth, but I stayed quiet. When I rounded the edge of the barn, I saw him. He was leaning against the wall like he had all the time in the world. Long coat, clean boots, pistol slung low on his hip. Not drawn, but ready. His hair was longer than I remembered, but the eyes were the same. Derek Long. He didn't see me until I stepped into view with the revolver raised. "Don't move." He turned his head slow, a grin spreading across his face like we'd just run into each other in town. "Well, hell," he said. "Didn't think I'd find you this far out." "Derek." "Not that names matter much," he shrugged. "Considering? You alone?" "Not for long." I lowered the revolver just enough to make it clear I'd shoot if I needed to. "Who sent you?" He tilted his head. "Who do you think?" I didn't need him to say it. The same crew that had turned on me. The same men who'd put a bullet in my brother and called it business. "You gonna shoot me?" Derek asked, still smiling. "Because I'll tell you now, you do. Someone else is coming right behind me. This don't stop with me." "I'm not giving you that chance." He shook his head. "I'm not here to kill you, Kane. Not today. Just scouting. Just letting you know. We know." I took a step forward, the barrel of the revolver brushing his coat. "Get back on your horse." He glanced toward the house. "You really think this place is gonna hold? You playing farmer now?" "Go." For a moment, I thought he'd push it, but Derek stepped back, swung into the saddle with that same easy grace he'd had back when we rode together. He tipped his hat like this was just a friendly call, then rode off slow, no hurry, no fear. By the time I got back inside, Clara had the kids upstairs, peeking through the loft railing. She turned when she saw me. "Talk." "Scout," I said. "One of the old crew. Wanted me to know they're close." "You think they're coming?" "They are." "How many?" "At least 3 more, maybe 5. Her jaw tightened. She didn't waste time with questions that didn't matter. Her eyes flicked to the windows, the barn, the tools. Then she looked back at me and said, "Then we get ready." And just like that, it wasn't just my fight anymore. The next 2 days moved like storm clouds, slow and heavy, carrying more weight than the sky could hold. Derek's visit hadn't left a mark on the land, but it had left one in the air. You could feel it every time the wind shifted, that low hum of trouble riding closer. We didn't talk about whether they'd come. We both knew they would. The only thing worth speaking on was how we'd meet them when they did. Clara didn't pace, didn't wring her hands. She got to work, same as me. That morning, she was already moving supplies into the cellar, sacks of flour, jars of beans, salted meat, stacking them neat against the far wall. She told Tommy to start practicing with the reloading, showed him how to keep the shells dry, how to count them out by feel, so he wouldn't have to look down in a pinch. I watched the boy take to it without a word of complaint. He wasn't playing at being a man. He was learning how to be one. Ellie stayed close to Clara, carrying smaller things, bundles of cloth, candles, matches. Her little hands busy in ways that kept her from thinking too hard about why. She'd glance at me sometimes, those quiet eyes asking questions she didn't have words for. I'd give her a nod, like I'd heard everyone and answered it too. Outside, I marked the high ground. There was a ridge near the back fence line that gave a clear view of the hills where riders would have to crest. I showed Tommy how to read the lay of the land, how a man could disappear behind a rise or a stand of brush until it was too late to spot him. He listened like it mattered because it did. The barn needed shoring up, so we braced the back wall with whatever wood we had left, old planks, broken furniture, even the lid from a busted feed bin. Every nail I drove in sent a throb through my side, but I kept swinging. Pain didn't have a say in the matter. That night, after the kids were in bed, Clara and I sat outside under the low glow of the lantern. The wind was steady, carrying the smell of rain, though the sky was clear. "You could leave," she said. Not sharp, not pushing, just laying it out like another piece on the table. "I know. You won't." "I can't." She nodded like she'd already known that answer. We didn't need to talk about the rest, the way men like the ones coming don't forgive and don't forget. She didn't ask me to promise we'd be fine. I wouldn't have lied to her like that anyway. The next morning, we set the traps. I hadn't used some of these in years. Wire snares hidden in tall grass, pits covered with brush, even a few lengths of sharpened stakes we buried near the outer fence. They weren't meant to kill, just slow a man down long enough to make him think twice. Tommy helped, his hands quick and sure, dirt smudged across his cheek. He didn't flinch when I told him to set the stakes deeper. By midday, we'd cleared the tools and anything else worth keeping from the barn loft. That'd be my spot when the time came. I cut small slits between the boards, wide enough to sight a rifle through, narrow enough to keep me hidden. Clara walked in as I was checking the angles. "How's it look?" she asked. "Good. I can cover the yard from here and the approach from the south." She studied the space, then handed me a canteen. "Keep it close." Her eyes lingered a second longer than they needed to. Not soft, not pitying, just steady. We worked like that for the rest of the day. No wasted movements, no small talk that didn't serve the work. I'd seen a lot of folks freeze when they knew a fight was coming. Clara wasn't one of them. She kept her focus on what she could do, and she did it without asking anyone to tell her how. That night, I took the first watch outside. The moon was a thin sliver, the kind of light that makes the land look sharper at the edges. I could hear Clara moving inside, the soft creak of floorboards as she checked on the children. When she stepped out onto the porch, her hair was pulled back with one of Ellie's worn ribbons. "You see anything?" "Not yet," I said. "But they're close. I can feel it." She didn't doubt me. That was the thing. Most folks would have asked how I knew, made me explain it until the knowing got muddied with words. Clara just accepted it, like she'd known the same kind of feeling herself. We stood there a while, side by side, not touching, just watching the dark. I thought about telling her more about the men coming, the things they'd done, the things I'd done. But some truths don't make you safer. Some just weigh you down before you've even picked up the rifle. When she finally went back inside, I stayed. The night was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm, when the land itself seems to be listening. I stayed until the stars began to pale, then went in to grab an hour's rest before the next day. By then, the traps were set, the barn was reinforced, the cellar stocked, and the rifles ready. We didn't have much, but what we had, we'd made count. And as I lay there in the dark, I realized it wasn't just me getting ready to stand my ground. It was us. The fourth morning after Derek showed his face came in wrong. The air was too still, the kind that presses against your skin like it's holding something back. Even the birds kept quiet. I was out by the barn, rifle in hand, checking the ridge when Clara walked up behind me. Her hair was tied back with one of Ellie's old ribbons, and her voice was steady. "How close?" "They're here," I said without looking at her. "I can feel it." We didn't waste time talking about what that meant. We'd both been waiting for this. She turned on her heel, and I followed. Inside, she told Tommy and Ellie to get into the cellar. No arguing, no questions. Tommy grabbed Ellie's hand, and they disappeared down the steps like they'd practiced it 100 times. Clara shut the door behind them, then looked at me. "Positions?" she asked. "Barn loft for me. You take the porch." She nodded once, grabbed her rifle from the wall, and moved to the front door. I slipped out the side and into the barn, climbing slow to keep the boards from creaking too loud. From up top, I had a clear view over the yard and the trail that wound down from the hills. It didn't take long to see them. 4 riders, dust rising behind them, moving fast until the cabin came into view. Then they slowed, spreading out like they'd done this before. The first one called out, his voice carrying easy in the morning air. "Kane, I know you're in there. Come out, and we'll talk proper." I didn't answer, just found him in the sight line, tall, thick coat, a scar along his neck that I remembered from another life. Another voice came, sharper. "That woman's got nothing to do with this. Don't make us do something we don't want to." My jaw tightened, but I still didn't speak. Beside the door, Clara's shadow shifted. She was ready. The first shot came without warning, a crack from the left. The bullet splintered the porch rail. Clara didn't flinch. She leaned out just enough and fired back, quick and clean. My own rifle barked a second later. One of the men tumbled from his saddle, hitting the dirt hard. That changed everything. The rest scattered, finding cover behind the fence and the brush. Gunfire snapped back and forth, hitting wood, kicking up dirt. A bullet shattered the window above the kitchen. Clara reloaded without looking away from the trail, her hands steady. I worked my rifle slow and deliberate, picking my shots, keeping them pinned. I wasn't out to kill every man out there, just to make sure none of them got close enough to the house. Then I saw him, Derek, charging low along the side, making for the porch. I fired once, missed by a breath. Clara's shot came right after mine, catching him in the leg. He went down screaming, sliding in the dirt. The others hesitated, looking between him and the house, and I knew this was the moment. I stood up fully in the loft, shoulders squared, rifle steady between two beams. My voice carried hard across the yard. "You came here for me. She has nothing to do with this. You come any closer, and I'll bury every one of you where you stand." Silence. I could hear my own breathing, the faint creak of the barn under my boots. Then a voice cracked back. "You're a dead man either way, Kane. Then you'd better aim better than you did today." The riders shifted, weighing it. They saw Clara standing her ground on that porch, rifle resting easy in her hands. They saw me in the loft, ready to make good on every word. And maybe they saw something else, that we weren't just two people defending a cabin. We were defending a place that had chosen to keep us, even if we'd both come here running from something. One by one, they backed off, not in a rush, not in a panic, just slow enough to make it clear this wasn't over. Then they turned their horses and rode out, the dust curling up behind them, until it was just the quiet again. The quiet didn't last for me. The pain in my side came back all at once, sharp enough to make me grab for the wall on the way down from the loft. Clara met me at the barn door, her chest rising fast, her hands still tight on the rifle. "You all right?" I asked. "You?" I nodded. That seemed to be enough for her. She stepped closer, not touching, just standing near. We stayed there a moment, breathing in the space between the danger leaving and the work starting again. Down in the cellar, the kids were silent until Clara opened the door. Ellie ran straight into her arms. Tommy came to me, small hands gripping my side in a way that made me stiffen for half a second before I returned it. That night, we buried the one who didn't ride away. No ceremony, no words, just dirt over a man who'd chosen to walk into the wrong yard. When it was done, Clara and I sat by the fire, the kids asleep in the loft, rifles stacked by the door. "I knew they'd come," I said, staring into the flames. "Didn't think I'd care who got caught in the crossfire." She didn't answer, so I looked at her. "But I did," I said. Her eyes didn't move from the fire. "You didn't run." I thought about it. I took a breath. I didn't want to leave. I looked down at my hands, dirt still under the nails, blood on the cuff of my shirt. "I never stayed anywhere before. Not really. Never had a reason." She reached over and set her hand on mine. "You do now." And for the first time in longer than I could count, I believed it. The days after the shooting felt different, like the land itself was holding its breath a little less, but not letting it out all the way. The dust from the riders had settled, the quiet had returned, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. This one carried the weight of what had happened and the knowledge that it could happen again. We buried the man who'd been left behind before the sun was up the next morning. Clara and I didn't speak while we worked. The ground was still soft from the last rain, and the shovels bit deep without much fight. It wasn't the first grave I'd dug, but I couldn't remember the last one I'd done with someone standing beside me, who wasn't just waiting for the job to be over. When we were done, Clara stood for a moment with her hands wrapped around the top of her shovel, looking down at the fresh mound. No prayer, no cross, no last words. Just a long breath, then she turned and walked back toward the house. I followed. Inside, the fire was already lit, and the smell of coffee filled the room. My side ached from the work, but I ignored it. Pain had a way of making itself part of the day if you let it, so I just kept moving. The kids were upstairs, still quiet, still watching us more than they spoke. Ellie had a way of looking at me now, like she was deciding if I was going to stay or vanish in the night. Tommy just seemed taller somehow, though it had only been a day. That night, after they'd gone to bed, Clara and I sat at the table with our coffee cooling in front of us. The rifles were leaned against the wall, cleaned and oiled. Outside, the wind had picked up, tapping the shutters against the frame in a slow rhythm. "I knew they'd come," I said finally. My voice sounded different in the quiet lower, like the truth had taken some of its weight. "Didn't think I'd care who got caught in the crossfire." Clara didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on the mug in her hands, her thumb running along the rim. "But I did," I said, more to myself than to her. She looked up then, meeting my eyes. You didn't run. I thought about it, I admitted, more than once, but when it came to it, I didn't want to leave. There was a long pause before I added, I never stayed anywhere before. Not really, never had a reason. She set her mug down and reached across the table, her hand finding mine. It wasn't soft. Her palm was calloused, fingers strong, but it was steady. You do now, she said. That should have scared me the way those words landed, but it didn't. Not the way I expected. The next morning, the sky was clear, and the air had that crisp edge that comes after a storm has moved on. We didn't talk about the fight. We didn't talk about what might come next. Instead, we fell into the kind of work that kept the place breathing, mending the fence where one of the horses had spooked, sweeping out the barn, checking the traps we'd set, and now didn't need. I found myself watching Clara more than I should have. The way she worked was different from the way I'd seen other folks do it. There was no wasted motion, but there was something else too. A patience, like she wasn't just fixing things for today, but for a time she meant to see. In the afternoon, Tommy followed me out to the pasture with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. He didn't say much, just kept pace with me, watching how I checked the fence posts and tightened the lines. After a while, he asked, You staying? I looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the way his eyes didn't blink away from mine. Then I glanced toward the house where Clara was standing on the porch, brushing the hair back from Ellie's face. Yeah, I said, I'm staying. The words felt like they'd been sitting in my chest for a long time, waiting for the right place to land. That evening, Clara made stew, and we all sat together at the table. Ellie leaned against her mother, her little hand resting on Clara's arm, while Tommy told some story about the goats that made him grin wider than I'd seen in days. I didn't add much to the talk, but I didn't feel outside of it either. After the meal, when the kids were upstairs and the house had gone quiet, except for the crackle of the fire, I stepped outside. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled them from a bucket. I stood there for a long while, breathing in the cold air, feeling the ground solid under my boots. When I came back in, Clara was at the table, lamplight soft on her face. She looked up at me, and there was no question in her eyes, no measuring, no holding back. You're home now, she said. And that was it. No long talk, no conditions, just the truth, plain and steady. For a man like me, those words could have felt like a chain. But sitting there in that room, with the sound of the wind outside and the warmth of the fire close, they didn't. They felt like a door opening, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I stepped through without looking back. 3 weeks passed, and the land began to breathe again. The air lost that tight, waiting edge it had carried since Derek showed up. The mornings came easier, slower, with the light spilling across the pasture like it belonged there. I never left. Nobody asked me to stay, but nobody asked me to go either. That was enough. I fell into the rhythm of the place without meaning to. At first, I thought I was just helping, fixing the things that needed fixing, lending another pair of hands so Clara didn't have to do it all herself. But somewhere in those days, it stopped feeling like I was doing someone else's work. It started feeling like mine too. I was up before the sun most mornings, pulling water from the well, walking the fence line to make sure no posts had given way in the night. Sometimes Tommy came with me, his small boots crunching in the frost. He didn't talk much at first, just watched how I moved, how I looked for weak spots in the wire. Over time, he started asking questions, how to tell if a post was still solid, how to see the difference between coyote tracks and a stray dog's. I showed him, not because I thought it'd make him into something, but because I knew what it meant to have someone teach you without making you feel small. My side still ached now and then. The wound had healed clean, but the scar pulled when I twisted wrong or lifted more than I should. Clara noticed once when I leaned against the porch rail, catching my breath. She didn't say a word about it, just handed me a flask of willow bark tea and went back to sweeping. That was her way. She didn't push. She just made sure you had what you needed to keep going. Ellie started coming around more too. The first time she climbed into my lap without being asked, it caught me off guard. She handed me a drawing she'd made, 4 figures in front of a little square house, 1 tall with a hat, 2 small, and a woman beside them. That's you, she said, pointing at the tall one. You drew me too tall, I told her. She grinned and leaned her head against my chest. I sat there a long time after she ran off, staring at that drawing. In the evenings, Clara cooked while Tommy and I finished whatever chore daylight still allowed. We'd bring in the tools, shut the barn, and by the time we came inside, the table would be set. It wasn't fancy. Beans, bread, stew when we were lucky, but it felt like more than I'd had in years. We ate together, and though I didn't talk much, I didn't feel like a stranger at the table. I noticed the little things, the way Clara would glance at the window when a gust hit it, the way her shoulders relaxed a bit more each night, the sound of Tommy's laughter getting louder. I'd been around long enough to know those changes don't happen when someone's just surviving. They happen when they start to believe they're safe. One morning, I found myself on the porch with a cup of coffee, tying knots in a length of rope out of habit. I wasn't watching the road like I used to. The thought hit me strange, that I'd gone 3 mornings without scanning the horizon for riders. The danger wasn't gone, but the pull of it had faded, like an echo that finally gave up shouting. Clara joined me, her own coffee in hand. She didn't sit right away, just leaned against the post, looking out over the pasture. "You still waiting for trouble?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not anymore." She studied me for a moment, then took a sip. "Good." We sat there in the quiet for a while before she spoke again. "I need a man here," she said. Her voice wasn't soft, but it wasn't hard either. Not a hired hand, not a visitor. A man for this house, for my children, for me. I met her gaze. "I know," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." She didn't smile, but I saw her shoulders drop just a little, like she'd been carrying that question for longer than I'd been here. That night, dinner felt different. Tommy talked about building better traps. Ellie showed off a necklace she'd made from bits of ribbon and string. Clara passed the bread without looking like she was thinking about the next day's fight. And me? I didn't think about the road I'd left behind, not once. Later, when the kids were asleep, I stepped outside. The sky was clean, the stars sharp. I walked to the barn, checked the latch, then turned my back on the road without a second thought. When I came inside, Clara was standing there in the lamplight. She didn't say much, just stepped close and rested her hand against my chest. "You're home now," she said. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing the moment. It was mine. Ours. The days had settled into something steady, the kind of rhythm I hadn't known in years. Mornings were for work, checking the fence lines, hauling water, fixing what needed fixing before it broke worse. Afternoons were for the kind of chores that could wait but shouldn't, like sanding the barn door so it wouldn't stick or cleaning the tools before rust set in. Evenings were for supper, the fire, and the quiet that came after the kids went upstairs. It was in that quiet that Clara spoke her mind. We'd just finished supper. Tommy had been talking big about catching a fox he swore had been skulking around the pasture, and Ellie had spent the better part of the meal sitting close to her mother, braiding a strip of ribbon through her own hair. When the plates were cleared and the kids had climbed the stairs, Clara stayed at the table. She didn't sit like she was tired. She sat like she was waiting for the right moment. I was stacking the plates to take to the wash basin when she said, "Jonas." I looked up. "Yeah?" "I need a man here," she said. Her voice was calm, like she'd thought about this long before she said it. Not a hired hand, not a visitor passing through. A man for this house, for my children, for me. I set the plates down slow. I'd heard a lot of words in my life meant to bind a man, trap him, tie him to something he didn't want. These didn't feel like those. They weren't a chain. They were an open door. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I know," I said. Her eyes didn't move from mine. "And? I'm not going anywhere." She let out a breath, not a sigh, not relief exactly, but something quieter, like she'd been holding air she didn't even know she'd been keeping in. I thought about telling her how I'd never been anyone's answer before, how the closest I'd come to belonging was riding with men who'd turn on you the second it suited them, how I'd spent years drifting from one job to the next, sleeping under strange roofs, waking in strange towns, and leaving before anyone remembered my name. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "I want to be here, with you, with them." She studied me for a long moment, and I didn't look away. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the loose boards of the porch, rattling them just enough to remind us the place still needed tending. But inside, the air felt still, warm. "You mean that," she said finally. "Yeah," I told her, "I do." It wasn't a promise for forever. I didn't deal in words like that, but it was a promise for as long as breath stayed in me, and for a man like me, that was no small thing. She stood then, pushing her chair back, and walked to the stove. I thought the talk was done, but she paused there, her hand resting on the edge of the counter. I don't want my children to see men come and go. I don't want them thinking that's what they should expect from people they trust. I stood too. Then I guess I'll just have to keep being here so they don't have to think it. That got the faintest smile out of her, the kind that starts in the eyes and works its way down. That night, the house felt different. Tommy was still up when I went to check on the barn, and he followed me out, asking about how to set a snare for that fox he'd been talking about. Ellie was asleep by the fire when I came back in, her head resting against Clara's lap while she mended one of Tommy's shirts. It was a picture I didn't know I'd been missing until I saw it. After we carried Ellie to bed, Clara stopped in the hallway. "You'll take the spare bed tonight?" "Yeah," I said, "unless you want me somewhere else." She gave me that steady look of hers. "Where you are is fine." I went to bed thinking about that, not the words so much as the way she'd said them, like I already belonged. In the morning, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. We worked side by side in the yard, not talking about the night before, but moving like two people who knew where the other would be without having to ask. I fixed the gate while she hauled feed to the goats, and when she passed by, she set a mug of coffee on the fence post without breaking stride. It was a small thing, but in a life like mine, the small things were the ones that lasted. The first time I rode up this valley, I didn't plan to stay. I was bleeding bad, running from men who knew how to track a scent and patient enough to wait for the right moment. My life had been a long line of doors I never walked through twice. This place should have been no different. But it was. Now the pasture is green in places, brown in others, the fence line straight enough to hold, but still leaning like it knows storms will come again. The barn smells of dry hay instead of damp rot. The goats have taken to crowding the gate when I walk by, waiting for the grain they know is coming. The house still creaks in the wind, but it feels like the sound of something alive, not something waiting to fall apart. It's been months since the shooting. Derek never came back, and neither did the others. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe they're just waiting for me to forget. But I've learned that forgetting isn't the same as living without fear. You just learn to put the fear in its place. The mornings come quiet now. I wake before the sun, not to check the road, but because I want to see the day start. Tommy comes with me most times, his stride longer than it used to be. He's learned to mend fence wire without asking, to check the troughs before I do, and to shoot straight without rushing the trigger. He's not a boy trying to be a man anymore. He's a boy learning how to stand his ground. Ellie's laughter is back. It's not loud yet, not all the time, but it's there in the way she runs across the yard with her ribbons trailing or hums when she's braiding bits of string. She leaves drawings on the table for me, stick figures with hats and boots, always standing beside a square house with smoke curling from the chimney. I keep them in a box by my bed, more valuable than any bounty I ever collected. And Clara, she works the same as she did that first day, steady, precise, never wasting a step. But there's a difference in her now, a looseness in her shoulders, a light in her eyes when she watches the kids or catches me looking at her. She doesn't have to carry the weight alone anymore. Neither do I. I've been a lot of things in my life. Drifter, bounty hunter, hired gun, brother. I've been the kind of man who knew how to leave before someone asked him to. But staying here has taught me things I didn't know I was missing. I've learned that a home isn't a roof and four walls. It's the sound of boots on the porch at dusk, the smell of bread baking while the fire burns low, the sight of someone you trust standing at the window when trouble comes. I've learned that family isn't just blood. It's the boy who calls for you when the fence gives way, the little girl who climbs into your lap without asking, and the woman who tells you you're home now without needing to explain what that means. I've learned that safety isn't the absence of danger. It's knowing that when danger comes, you've got someone at your side who will stand and fight with you. And maybe the hardest thing I've learned is that staying can take more courage than walking away. It means facing the days when things are hard, when you're tired, when you wonder if you're enough, and choosing to be there anyway. Tonight the sky is clear, and the stars are so sharp they look like they could cut the dark open. Clara's inside with Ellie, finishing the mending on one of Tommy's shirts. The boys in the barn, checking on a new gate we put up last week. I'm sitting on the porch, rope in my hands, tying knots for no reason, except it feels good to keep them in my fingers. The road's still out there. I could follow it tomorrow if I wanted, but I don't. Not because I'm afraid of what's beyond it, but because I've already found what I was chasing without knowing it. Clara steps outside, drying her hands on her apron. She stands beside me for a moment, looking out over the pasture. "Cold night," she says. "Yeah," I answer. She doesn't move away, neither do I. The lantern light spills out behind us, warm against the chill. The kids' voices carry faint from inside. Ellie asking for another story, Tommy telling her one before his mother can get there. Clara looks at me, her eyes steady. We did all right, didn't we? I nod. We did more than that. We stand there until the cold starts to bite through, and then she heads in. I follow. The door closes behind me, and for a moment, I just stand in the center of the room taking it all in. The fire, the smell of supper still in air, the quiet that feels earned. This isn't the kind of life I thought I'd end up with. It's better. Harder, too, because it matters more. And that's the thing I'd tell anyone who's still running from whatever they think will catch them. Sometimes what catches you is the very thing you needed all along. So that's where my road has brought me. Not to an end, but to a place worth staying. A place where my name means something when it's called. A place where I can lay my head at night knowing I'll be here when the sun comes up.